Well, good morning. We don't have the microphone, so I have to tell myself to make sure that I project, which is something I remind Mung of all the time, projecting. Of course, he's the only guy I know that can wear a microphone and be too quiet. So I thought I would, I have a couple topics that Mung has been saying, you ought to really talk about that, you ought to really talk, oh, you really should talk about that. And so these things keep repeatedly coming up, and we have a small group, and now we have, I guess I should really make it an online announcement that we're not going to let any new people into the Dharma Hall until the COVID-19 epidemic eases off. But our wonderful governor has come up with a new rubric on what we're supposed to be doing with the pandemic, and now he's talking about how many beds there are in a hospital opposed to how many people are getting sick. See, that's a different rubric. And how often do you get to use the word rubric in your everyday speech?
Not often.
Not often at all. I remember when education started using the word rubric, and I kept having to look it up every time somebody mentioned it. So in my mind, I had it fixed what that was. So I thought today, in honor of our future temple cook, I'm slowly preparing her.
You haven't even tasted my food yet.
I thought I would talk about women in Buddhism. And I'll be calling on you, Venerable, because you went and did the pilgrimage to India, so you can make sure that I'm on track of what I'm talking about. In the beginning, 2,600 years ago, basically religious seekers were men, because it was a man's world. And they were called shramana, which means seeker. And it's kind of the root word for shramanera or shramanarika, which is a monk or a novice monk or a novice nun. And so you had these men that would go off. And traditionally in India, it went like this, if everything was perfect, that a family would raise all the kids, the husband and wife would raise all the kids, and the husband would make sure that everything was provided for. In other words, he was not abandoning his wife. That's the ideal. And that he would leave on a religious quest with the permission of his wife. Remember, this is ideals. I'm not saying that everybody did it that way. I'm saying that's the way they pretend that everybody did it. And so the wife would stay home. She was now working on being a grandmother, and the husband, because the Indians have the idea of 3 stages of life. And the last stage is to develop yourself spiritually. And this is after your family responsibilities are taken care of. And so in the Buddhist time, when the Buddha went off, this was something that was done. And nothing I've ever read addresses what's going on when he does that. It's just the Buddha, we have the story, which is very formalized, that on a trip into town, on his chariot, he saw old age, illness, and death. And he became aware of it. And we're told that he led a very sheltered life, which, historically researching this, it's entirely possible that he did really live a sheltered life and not have been exposed to these things. And this bothered him. He was a sensitive person. He was a sensitive child. We have stories from his youth where he's reacting to cruelty to animals and things like that. And it's remarked that he would have a tendency to kind of go off on himself and sit under a tree, kind of foreshadowing. How often do you get to use for? It's the first time I've ever used foreshadowing in my whole life. I got to throw it in there. It just popped into my head. I've got my oxygen turned up. Yeah. And I'm feeling really good. I think I'll go to Las Vegas. Somebody informed me today that the rooms in the gambling casinos have oxygen pumped in so everybody feels good. I never knew that. I didn't know that people sat there and gambled all night long because they were getting extra oxygen. Amazing stuff. So the Buddha did a very traditional thing in that he talked to his wife about it. We don't know what she said, although she probably said, okay, you're the boss, I guess you get to do whatever you want to do, but I'm not real happy about it, because at the time she was pregnant, you know, with her first child, and so the Buddha, and there's many different versions of the same story, which people get all confused about. I don't know why, because if I asked two of you to think about a story of such and such, you would give me different stories. There would be slight differences. And the longer ago it was, the more the differences would be, right? So the version that I heard when I was young was that he did not go into the room when his son was born. Didn't go into the room, stood outside the room, and when he heard the baby cry, then he left. And this was because he felt that if he went in and saw the baby, he could not leave. He had great attachment, very positive, great attachment to his wife and the idea of having a son. But having said that, I'm sure that in his mind he thought, I'm free to go now. This is the other side. Life is never simple, right? The other side is I'm free to go now on a religious quest because my father now has an heir to the throne. So I can go out and wander around in the woods and everything, and the Buddha goes off, and we're told he basically rides with his charioteer to the very edge of his kingdom. He borrows a sword from him, cuts off his hair, and hair is how, in the old days, they would denote caste system. That the hairstyle they had would show what caste they were. And so when he cut off his hair, he's removing his caste. And of course we have Buddhist monks 2,600 years ago who cut their hair off on a regular basis. Twice a month is the rule. Although, you know, the Japanese seem like they shave their head every day because, well, I just do that. I like it looking like this, you know. But typically, it was twice a month. You cut your hair off. So he did this and he got rid of his caste. And he exchanged clothes with his charioteer. He took off his fine brocade garments and gave it to the charioteer, and then started on his quest. And in his quest, he studied with two great masters. He learned how to do meditation, and he learned about the concept of shunyata, which is emptiness. He was introduced to that. He mastered both teachings. Both of the teachers really wanted him to stay and take their place as they got older. But he continued on. Nowhere does he encounter women. Okay, at that time, we have no reports of women wandering through the forest half naked, covered with cow dung, with matted hair and all that, because that's the next stage. When you're a wandering ascetic, you don't ever cut your hair again. And the traditional yogis in India never cut their nails. It's pretty gross. Just never cut their nails or toenails, or never cut their hair, because they'll be losing spiritual energy. It's just like it's like going to Hogwarts in India. And here are these people doing all this. Well, the Buddha kind of changed things. First of all, he went off and he did the whole, I'm an ascetic, and he covered himself in ash and cow poop and smelled really bad. that solved his problem for any desire he had for women, because he never encountered women in the forest, because the minute they smelled him, maybe 2 or 3 blocks away, they disappeared. So you don't ever hear about these ascetics having a big problem with real women. They imagine things. Okay, that happened. They were tempted by Mara, and they were tempted by sensuality, and they had a vague memory of what that was. But if you think about it, nobody wanted to be around them. The ones that are in the cities now in India, they have to clean up at least a little bit, right?
Yes.
Yes, yes. See, he's the one that went to India, so
yes, their garments are clean.
yeah. So they're not looking like, you know, a field of anyway. So here's the Buddha wandering around. There are no women involved in this quest. It's only men, and this, of course, is because the caste system has become, in some areas, completely accepted. In other areas, they're still debating on it, whether they're going to go with this caste system. They did have the notion of karma, but they weren't quite sure how it was going to work. Not everywhere were the Brahmins the top dogs. In some places, the Kshatriya class, which the Buddha belonged to, which was a warrior caste, they were the top dogs. So they were still figuring out the dynamics of this social system. So there were no women involved in this. Women had to stay home, take care of the grandchildren, maybe keep things going so nobody starved to death. And men, of course, because they were of a higher birth, because that's what they think in India, you know, that men are a higher birth than women, and women are a higher birth, say, than a goat. So, because, you know, in India, women are worth so many goats, right? Hopefully. If you have a really attractive woman, maybe she's worth 3 goats. And so they had their own little system going there. And the Buddha becomes awakened. Now, the big thing about awakening is that Hindus had the idea, and still do, that as you go through successive lives, and they could be many, 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 many lives. Sometimes you hear astronomical numbers of lives. That you will become more and more pure. You will overcome all the ignorances of attachment and anger and sloth, all of these things that hold you back from having total purity. Because when you're totally pure, when you die, you don't come back. Because the whole process of rebirth, for them, reincarnation, is you come back so that you can become more pure. And if a woman is lucky, she is born as a man. And then she has a chance of becoming pure enough to reunite with God. Okay, so you want to keep that straight. There is a good and valid reason why women were second-class citizens. Now in America, we don't have that excuse. But let's face it, if you're a lower life form, you would be a second-class citizen, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And so here's the Buddha wandering around. He's teaching men. One of the nice things about teaching men is, for the most part, sexual desire was not something to be overcome, for the most part. And women were kind of kept at a distance. And even today, women are enjoined not to touch monks, because Buddhism typically has. See, it took me a long time to figure out why the Japanese thought this. I used to watch Japanese movies. Every month I'd go to L.A. to the Toho La Brea and watch samurai movies, but sometimes I would see current movies and subtitles. And I got to the point, it was just like hearing it with the subtitles, you know. And I found out watching Japanese movies that if you're a Japanese man and you touch a Japanese woman, nobody can constrain themselves, and all of a sudden they're ripping their clothes off and getting ready to have sex. Because that's why the Japanese never touch each other, because they could not control their desire. And I think they maybe got that from Buddhism, because monks are never supposed to be touched by women. A man can touch a monk, but a woman cannot touch a monk, because you never know what's going to happen. They're going to start ripping their robes off and satisfying their sexual desires, which they've suppressed all their life. So we didn't have women in the Sangha for a while. And then the Buddha's mom decided that she wanted to do what the Buddha did and go on a spiritual quest. And because the Buddha had become very famous, you know, of all the religious leaders, he was the only one that was really positively famous in his time. He was never suppressed. You know, he traveled wherever he went and people accepted him because he fit in that system of I'm off ascetic, I go in the forest. He did that for 7 years. Then he woke up, you know, and people that see auras, they could see his aura, his halo around his body. It was pure, and everybody gravitated towards him. And men and women both went to see him. Matter of fact, all the places that the monks had to stay at, which they called parks, because it was very much like a park, and they started building enclosures and building patios so that they could sit out there when it was raining and not get wet. They were all donated by women. Which was interesting, but they were all donated by women. The women took care of the helpless men. Because, honest to goodness, for a long time the monks didn't know how to come out of the rain. So the women started kind of helping them with these very practical things. And the Buddha's mom came to him one day and said, I want to be a monk. And the Buddha said, oh, no, don't ask that. Now, he had gotten rid of a lot of things that were very bad things. From our viewpoint, he got rid of, there was no caste system within Buddhism. He didn't accept that because he was enlightened. And because he was enlightened, he saw that the caste system wasn't real. It was a political construction by men to suppress other men and women. And he saw that, and okay, so we don't have the caste system in Buddhism. But we still have the problem that women are inferior. And the source of all anguish and pain that men have to suffer. And so the Buddha's mother came and said, I wish to join the Sangha, the group. I wish to join. And not only did his mother come, but his wife came. And she was standing there going, we wish to follow you. We wish to follow the Dharma that you teach. And they asked him 3 times. And most of the time, when you asked the Buddha 3 times, he gave in. It was a magic formula. You had to figure it out first. But if you went and asked him and then you went away, and then you came back and you went and asked him and you went away, came back and asked him again, he said, oh, okay, all right. You did the magic. His mother did it 3 times. He said, please stop asking me. It pains me to have to say no to you, that you cannot come. And there's been large arguments about this, and there's an entire tradition of Buddhism that says the Buddha just simply could not let women come in because they were inferior, which is total nonsense. The Buddha never treated women as if they were inferior. But he had a bunch of men following him. And let's be realistic here now. We're going to get a bunch of women and mix them in this group. Are we going to have problems? Yeah, if you believe in Santa Claus, yeah, we're going to have problems. And he had problems immediately when women were allowed in. But his mother pushed the case, and the Sangha would move sometimes as a body of people from one area to the next. The Buddha taught his disciples very important and practical things like, if you're going to get together and practice the Dharma, and the old are going to teach the young, particularly during the summer training periods, when you go, you have to pick an area that's big enough that they can support you, because monks were living off of alms. They were going in every day and collecting food from the lay people who were supporting them, and he said, you don't go to a little village with 1,000 monks. You go to a big city if you have 1,000 or 2,000 monks, so that you're not causing problems for the people that live there, who might go hungry trying to feed you, because it's a holy act to give to a holy man. So they were moving. They got up and they were going to move to another place, and there were a lot of them. There were hundreds. And at the end of this train of people walking down the road was the Buddha's mother. And her daughter-in-law had shaved their heads. And they had gotten pieces of cloth. You know, the original robes of monks were just big square pieces of cloth. In Theravadan countries, it's the same thing. When you get a set of robes to wear, you get a stack of tablecloths. And then you wrap them around a certain way, and when you get done, there are the Theravada robes. And so they had done that, and they had dressed as monks, and they had shaved their head, and they're walking behind the Buddha. And Ananda said, you really have to do something about this, because it's very embarrassing. Your mother and your wife are walking in the dust of the crowd that's walking down the road because you won't let them become monks. And the Buddha said, well, they asked 3 times, but I said, please don't ask again. And Ananda said, it's not going to work. You know women, they're not going to give up. And so the Buddha came to the next encampment, and he said to everybody, I'm considering making the 2 of them monks. Well, you have to understand, by this time, there's a whole gaggle of women following, because they're going through villages, going to the next place, and they're seeing the Buddha's mother. They recognized her. She was the queen. And the princess, his wife. And they're dressed as monks, and they've shaved their heads, and that's unheard of. You don't cut your hair in India if you're a woman. And they've done this outrageous thing. And so these women started shaving their heads and following the Buddha. But they weren't ordained. So the Buddha stopped and he said to the Sangha, he said, I'm thinking about doing this. To this day, if we are going to do something as a Sangha, and it's a really important thing that really has an effect on what's going on, the abbot, a good abbot, will always talk to his monks. He doesn't just do this unilateral stuff of, oh, well, I decided today that we're going to change the robes we wear for the rest of eternity. I don't like the robes we're wearing, so we're going to stop wearing brown and we're going to wear teal, and you know, because I like it better. No, we don't do things like that. Any change of any consequence usually is talked with the monks about. And Fu Men knows that because he comes here and he has to listen to me talk to him. Well, I think we're going to do this, and then we want to do that. And I'm actually not telling him what we're going to do. I'm really looking to see the reaction. I'm looking for consensus. Buddhism is a democracy with a dictator. You know, that's basically what it is. Because it's just like the United States of America. We're a democracy with an elected dictator, right? Because when all is said and done, somebody has to say yes or no. Has to say, yes, we're going to do this. Nope, in my judgment. But hopefully that person is listening to the majority. So that was the Buddha's case, and he said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Look at my poor mom. She's out there. She's all covered in dust and dirt, and she's been stepping in poop and all this kind of stuff, and she's following us. And he had a cousin, an infamous cousin, who every time things looked like they were going good, this cousin would cause heartache for him. And the cousin said, okay, you can do that, but if you do that, I'm going to leave. And I have a lot of people that are following me because I'm your cousin. And I'm an important guy in this Sangha. And people like the things that I teach in this Sangha. And if you let one woman come in here, I will take and cause a schism, and half of the people will leave with me. So what do you think of that? And the Buddha said, well, that's pretty drastic stuff there. Let's talk about this. And so they talked, and the Buddha said, he made his argument. And he had to argue with him, you know, because Devadatta said, he said all the things that men had been saying for thousands of years. You know, women are really good at raising children. They're really good at cooking and cleaning house. But you don't want to give them any position of authority, because my gosh, what would happen then? It would be total chaos. And this was Devadatta's viewpoint. And he used the Hindu notion of reincarnation, that what's going on here is women are just not quite up to the standard of men, and they need multiple rebirths so that they can be as good as men. And the Buddha said, no, that's not true at all. You know I don't feel that, blah, 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 blah. And so they hit a compromise. And the compromise was, Devadatta said, okay, if we're going to have women, they have to have more rules. And so I really don't think that the 340 rules that the women had to follow were formulated at that moment. I don't think so. I think they grew as time went by. There's even a set of rules that somebody stuck in there that aren't even part of the Vinaya, but Buddhist nuns are stuck with it, you know. But Devadatta said, okay, I'll accept women in the Sangha as long as the most senior woman, the longest standing nun or monk, I always call them monks because people, when I say nun, they go, oh, Catholic nun, the flying nun. You have those? So I just call everybody a monk. He said the most senior woman, she could have been a monk for 50 years and be fully enlightened, and she will walk behind the newest novice man in procession. And that's the way it's done today. Ever since Devadatta forced the Buddha's hand. He said, this is the concession I want. The women will always have a monk as their teacher, as their primary teacher. There can be a senior nun, and she will teach the other nuns, but she has to have a primary teacher that's a man. This was not the Buddha's idea. This was the compromise. And so the Buddha said, okay. And the extra rules. And if you compare the rules of the monk, which are 250, and you see the rules of the nuns, which is 340, they're the same. All they did was they picked at it. They took one rule that meant 2 or 3 things, and they made 2 or 3 rules out of it, so that they carried a heavier burden. And then they came up with some special things, you know, a woman can never sit higher than a man, and and it went on and on. So now, we didn't buy a new card, did we?
5 minutes.
You did? Good man.
No, 5 minutes.
Huh?
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. I thought you said I did.
No, 5 minutes recording time left.
5 minutes recording time left. Uh-huh. So, the women were ordained. And I read a psychological study some years ago that someone had done of religious. I'm using the religious like Catholics do, which means monks, nuns, ministers, blah, 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 blah. And it was very enlightening because I've known many nuns and many monks and abbots and big shots and little shots and all of that kind of stuff. And I know myself. And I know at times that I'm basically helpless compared to a woman. And I tell Vietnamese this, and they don't quite, the women always laugh. The men are not sure whether they want to go along with me. Because I would tell them, so I've watched this happen in Orange County, in San Jose, ever since the fall of Saigon. If you want to build a temple, where there is no temple, it'll take a monk about 20 years to collect the money and make this happen. If you want to build a temple where there's no temple, it'll take a nun about 5 years. Okay? I don't believe in multitasking most of the time. I think you need to focus on what you're doing. But if there's anybody that can multitask, it's a woman. Men need women around to remind them to take a bath. Ascetic men need women around to remind them to eat. And there's been lots of studies of this, and everybody agrees. You know, Gandhi's wife would tell him, it's time to go have lunch, because he would forget to eat. So is there a difference between men and women? Yeah. Does it make one better than the other? Probably not. It just makes them different. And in the American Sangha, in the Mahayana tradition, there are no women in the Theravadan traditions. They're all self-proclaimed nuns, you know, that they did this and that. Now, Sri Lanka has literally, really fully ordained women. It's the only Theravadan country I know of that has done it. Tibetans never had fully ordained nuns. They never had nuns. They had highly devoted women that took some extra precepts other than a layperson, but everybody keeps waiting for the Dalai Lama to do something. It's very difficult for him because they never had him before. It means he'd have to be a true trailblazer, and I wish he'd get off his duff and ordain these women and get it over with, but that's up to him. But I can tell you, all the people that I've known in America that have been involved with temples and centers, women are not a second class. They're all on the same level. They're not on the same level in Japan. They're not on the same level in China or Korea or Vietnam, although they're making a lot of headway in Vietnam. They really are. Times are a-changing. But in America, women are of the same rank, of the same level, of the same authority as men. And that's my talk on women. And I'll ring the bell. You've only got 2 minutes left. How are we going to put anything else on this?
Mahaprajna Paramita Heart Sutra Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva when practicing deeply the Prajna Paramita clearly saw that all 5 skandhas empty and pass beyond all suffering. Shariputra form does not differ from emptiness. Gate, Bodhi Swaha, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhi Swaha, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Page 30. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to master them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May the suffering ones be suffering free. May their fears fearless be. May their grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. I wish that all